Welcome, everybody. My name is Kim Woodworth, and I have the great pleasure of serving as the Executive Director for the Economic Development Council of Colorado. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. You've all entered into this webinar on mute, but that doesn't mean we want you to stay on mute. This is our opportunity to really connect with our partners all across the state. So we encourage you to ask those questions. Raise your hand or put it into the chat section. I will be monitoring the chat section for you, but please ask questions of Dan today because this is great information, kind of a reintroduction, if you will. If you have any questions after the webinar, please send them to EDCC's program manager, Bobby, at bobby.blank@edcconline.org. We will follow up after today's webinar with a link to this recording as well as the presentation. We will also post it to our website on the webpage dedicated to the Knowledge Network series. And finally, please follow us today's discussion on our social media outlets at EDC of Co. And be sure to use the hashtag KNS2026 and EDCC events so that we can follow you. For those of you who are new to us, EDCC is a statewide industry association that supports the economic development efforts across Colorado. We connect our communities, our members, and our partners to high-quality educational opportunities and trusted resources and advocate for sound policies and programs that support a vibrant economy and enhance quality of life for all of Colorado. EDCC members come from a variety of settings. We are rural and urban, public and private sector, for-profit and not-for-profit, and include individual communities, counties and regional organizations, local and state government, chambers of commerce, university, and private industry. So if you say you don't do economic development, I will tell you otherwise. EDCC has built a virtual arsenal of information to keep our professionals updated on the latest trends, data, case studies, and thought leadership papers that our professionals can take back to their local leaders to begin these important discussions at the local level. Make this feature a part of your ongoing professional development and tool that can help you inform, educate, and transform your community. Also, I would like to take a moment to share with you our 2026 events and programming lineup. We will be traveling across the state in April for our regional roundtable roadshow, visiting each of our 5 regions. More to come as we get those dates and locations set. Also, we are thrilled to announce that we will be celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. Yes, we've been around for 50 years, and we get to celebrate that along with Colorado and America, as well as IEDC. It's going to be a big year, and we are going to be doing this. Our Drive Lead Succeed conference will be held September 27th through the 30th in the beautiful and historic city of Cripple Creek at the brand new Chamonix Resort and Hotel. Reserving your hotel now is very important because it is prime leaf peeping season, and we will be challenged with hotels, with those people who are wanting to also see their leaf changing. So make sure to get your registration and your hotels soon. Also, Basic Economic Development course provides a substantial and intensive introduction to the theory and fundamentals of comprehensive economic development. This 5-day course, scheduled for June 8th through the 12th, emphasizes beneficial development resulting from local action and revolves around 5 major themes: innovative community concepts, regional economics, basic development factors, core economic development techniques, and emerging trends. So now, without further ado, let's turn our attention to today's core topic, unlocking the lab effect. Colorado is home to a world-class concentration of innovation of over 30 federally funded research labs, from NOAA to NIST to NCAR to NREL. This ecosystem supports over 17,000 high-paying jobs and pumps $2.6 billion into our state's economy annually. But the real value of these labs isn't just in the buildings. It's the multiplier effect they create for our communities. So you ask, why do these labs matter to your local economic strategy? These institutions are a global magnet for world's most brilliant minds. When a lab anchors in Colorado, it creates a halo effect of specialized talent that spills over into our local startups, improves our schools, and strengthens our regional workforce. Every federal dollar invested acts as a seed. It builds local supply chains, supports surrounding small businesses, and provides the intellectual taproot for industries like quantum computing, aerospace, and sustainable agriculture. The question for every leader on this call today is how do we harness this? By integrating these assets into your local economic development strategy means that attracting industry by using the proximity of world-class research to recruit companies that need specialized testing or expertise, or helping local innovators access the intellectual property and high-tech equipment housed within these walls, and ensuring that from the Front Range to the eastern and western slopes and to all four corners, our communities are not just spectators of global science, but we are active participants in the wealth that it generates. That is the core mission of CoLabs. It's a 501c3 nonprofit consortium founded in 2007. They serve as the streamlined access to assets gateways for labs, universities, and businesses. Their work is built around three pillars by promoting Colorado as a global center for science and growth, educating decision makers on the real world impact of research infrastructure, and connecting industry and economic developers to catalyze the partnerships that create jobs and improve lives. Leading this charge is Mr. Dan Powers, the Executive Director of CoLabs. Since 2016, Dan has been the chief advocate for turning taxpayer-funded research into a national asset that benefits all humanity. A CU Boulder alum with 25 years of experience in policy and public engagement, Dan is a master at creating those eureka moments, situations where leaders look at our lab ecosystem and say, wow, I never thought of that before. Today, he is here to show us how to integrate the lab effect into your own regional growth. Let's give Dan a warm Zoom welcome in our typical Zoom fashion with all of the clapping and emojis. Dan, we're going to let you take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Kim. And thank you, everybody, for giving me the time to get CoLabs on your radar. We are celebrating our 20th anniversary next year. And as we all have been living through the previous 12 months, it's been quite a tumultuous and even historic time for anyone involved in science and technology transfer and broadly economic development and keeping things going. I'm grateful to be able to champion the network of federally funded research laboratories and joint institutes on university campuses here in Colorado, and have a brief presentation that I'm going to keep at somewhat of a, let's say, 5,000-foot level, knowing that each of you would have specific industry focus areas, different topics of relevancy for the kind of businesses that you're looking to nurture and help grow. So I'm very open to your questions. And I described to Bobby and Kim as we planned this that I have my notepad ready and I am looking to get questions from you. And I presume to have a lot of follow-up after with here's who you need to reach out to. Here's the program I can tell you about. So please be ready to ask me some questions. Let me bring up my screen here for a quick background on, there we go. Starts for sharing my screen first here. A quick background on CoLabs. There we go. And thank you. I recognize several people that have engaged with CoLabs in the past, been direct supporters. Thank you for that engagement with us over these years. All right. As Kim had described, here's just a brief context of the scope of CoLabs. And we are a nonprofit. We've never been federally funded directly. As a nonprofit organization championing the ROI on taxpayer-funded research, our funding has come from the research universities in particular, some of the laboratories, depending on what the protocols are for how they're allowed to spend their money, and then private sector businesses and economic development organizations who all have an interest in what is happening in federal labs across Colorado and look how they could best leverage the resources that are there. I'm glad you're seeing this on Zoom. It can be small font when I'm doing this in person. This is not meant for you to memorize, but the names of several of these labs, and this isn't a complete exhaustive list, but I put this on screen for you to be able to glance through, and the names of these labs somewhat describe the focus area of science that they're involved in. Others are probably much more of a spectrum of research than you might have expected. So that's just something. Oh, and I'm sorry, is this showing your, am I blocking the screen with what I can see? Oh, sorry.
You're
I saw
looking
your,
good.
okay. I apologize. There's some Zoom stuff that's on my screen, and I just want to make sure it wasn't on your screen. In any case, back to this list. Glance through this, and I hope that it gets some wheels turning on where your economic development priorities are and the kind of research that might be relevant to those goals that you're working on. I can tell you from the A to Z spectrum of labs that we have in Colorado, which have grown up organically over decades, we have the second highest concentration of federally funded research laboratories in the country. And this wasn't by some grand national plan. It really got started in the late 50s and 60s with laboratories such as what is now the Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics on CU Boulder, doing research in the atmosphere. The Bureau of Standards, which became National Institutes of Standards and Technology in Boulder in the 50s and into 60s. The Centers for Disease Control has their only research laboratory outside of Atlanta in Fort Collins. And the Transportation Technology Center is in Pueblo, and they are researching all kinds of, in fact, any kind of surface transportation technology, not just rail. But they have all located here over these past several decades, with part of the rationale being that if a new office or lab were to open here in Colorado, they would also be able to connect with the other previously existing laboratories that are here. And it's just grown on itself over time. So Kim actually had done a fantastic overview of CoLabs. Thank you at the beginning. So I'll just make another quick reference here. We know that coming out of COVID, there was additional boosts to particular laboratories and their funding. And so this number that I have listed here is really about a $3 billion impact that we've seen on the state. It's also about 17,000 direct and indirect jobs across all these different labs. And the key aspect of their impact, well, yes, it's financial, but I would say it's really been the brain power and the ideas and the serendipitous interactions between these laboratory scientists and their private sector external partners, particularly in economic development realms, in the incubators, in the tech transfer activity of the universities. That is where the right people have met the right people to nurture new companies and provide resources to the existing companies here in our state. So I'd like to run through just three quick kind of high-level examples. Make sure I can click on this across a few different labs, mostly to get some information on your radar and reiterate if you weren't previously aware of some of the activity going on in these labs. Pardon my somewhat fuzzy new logo. The information from what used to be NREL is still in process. But the building you're seeing there is part of the Energy Systems Integration Facility at former National Renewable Energy Laboratory, now the National Laboratory of the Rockies. You can see I have a reference here to the CRADAs and the SBIRs that are key partnership frameworks that NLR and really almost all of the other laboratories engage in. If you have entrepreneurs or existing businesses in your community, in your region, if they have any kind of new technology that they are looking to develop themselves or just that they are needing, I can't stress enough how much the federal laboratories are a resource ostensibly for free. Let's say there's caveats on exactly what you can access totally without there being some kind of cost or funding requirement. But take it as a sort of default that the way to access assets in these laboratories is free and available through another set of protocols, such as these CRADAs or SBIRs, Small Business Innovation Research Grants. And that's what I've found in my experience with going out to chambers of commerce and economic development groups, is that the labs themselves and that full scope there that I was listing earlier isn't a first thought of where to go to find resources, particularly for growing companies. Going a little more specific here into the National Laboratory for the Rockies, get this to click forward. In their most recent economic impact study or impact report, these are 2023, FY 2023 into 2024 numbers. This lab is really one of the largest federally funded research center employers in the state. I wanted to articulate here, and I apologize, I see I've misspelled Jefferson County, making my edits really quick there, but an example of bringing from the state level down to an even more local level, the kind of impact that a federal lab can have here. You see these references to Jefferson County. And I think what is often missed in terms of the economic impact of the labs is the indirect impact that they have. Think everything from direct partners working on some kind of technology project to caterers and meeting planners and contractors who are working on different facility upgrade projects. And then the connections that can come in when they're working with an external partner who provides some additional technologies that they need, that the lab is deciding it's not for them to buy this, but they do need to partner with another technology or engineering company. So they work as incredible resources to a local economy and also at the state level to help provide the both funding for and the, in essence, rationale for why small companies of all kinds should partner with them and can otherwise benefit from those interactions with them. Going to another whole realm of activity, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They have laboratories, particularly in Fort Collins. They do have some other field research sites throughout the state. But the Agricultural Research Service, the Rocky Mountain Research Station, which is from the U.S. Forest Service, and also the National Wildlife Research Center. These three different Department of Agriculture organizations employ over 600 people directly, and more so because of their agricultural focus. They are helping to support billions of dollars in agricultural productivity across the country. And then here in Colorado, I wanted to make a reference specifically to the Agricultural Genetic Resources Preservation Research that's here. Some of you may know this up in Fort Collins is our own version of the Svalbard Seed Lab that is over in Norway. There's actually a cryogenic seed lab up on Colorado State University campus. It's owned and run by the Department of Agriculture, where they have over 1 million different samples of both plants and animal genetic material. When it comes to the agricultural material that they have, this relatively small staff with an even more so relatively small budget, just over $1 million, it's like $1.1 million. They're helping to protect and provide the safety net for over $2 billion in agricultural productivity. That return on investment, and actually it's more than just a financial return on investment, this investment that we all are making as taxpayers to ensure that there is, in the case of the seed lab, a safety net in case of, in essence, think of it as a previously unknown disease that could come through and wipe out the ability for existing crops to thrive. What they provide there as a service to our agricultural industry and really our country's ability to provide food is profound and is actually not as well appreciated as I think it should. But think in the process of them collecting these seeds, or in different cases, pollen, etc., and interacting with the farmers and ranchers throughout Colorado, as well as throughout the state, they are providing a source of intellectual insight on what they, as the researchers, are finding is the latest in some kind of either biological threat or other type of, let's say, soil chemistry or the impacts of climate change, et cetera. They are a source of information for our farmers. Of course, it's a two-way conversation. They're also intentionally bringing in farmers and ranchers to find out what their experience has been on the ground over these past several years or just within a season, and that interplay between the external partners, in this case from the agricultural industry, and our researchers here is a crucial resource to the country. Within those conversations, where Collabs really comes into play is I'm listening for, and with our network of volunteers, listening for the latest research and latest questions that are coming up from the external partners. And we help make connections between those outside entities and the labs. And ideally, they'll be learning from each other. And when it comes to tech transfer, we're finding that some people, of course, would always want to stay in academia or otherwise stay in research. Other people already have the kind of business that they are running and they're not looking to start say a new line of business. But in there's always a percentage really brilliant, really curious people. And as Kim referenced at the beginning, we look to create situations that make people say, wow, I never thought of that before. That is where the connections get made, and there can be new business opportunities, new ways to leverage the discoveries and research and the assets within these labs. And that's what we're looking to constantly nurture, are those kind of interactions. I'm going to take a step to a whole nother realm of research that's happening here to just get this again on your radar. If you're interested in, was referencing here, the Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics. So think any kind of space-based assets, satellites, and other types of rocketry that would be involved in exploration. A way to also perceive what LASP has as some of its research that would be relevant is a significant amount of remote sensing technology that is connected to satellites. There's a real Venn diagram between all the agricultural topics I was just referencing and what LASP is involved in and their partners in the private sector. If you have interest in remote sensing technologies that can help with understanding the change in, say, food production capabilities or in drought impacts that might be happening, and the kinds of technologies that are then there to build on resiliency needs for your community. This is where there's this thread from the basic science and the observational research that's happening, and then the problems that we're able to assess even with more detail. So now that I'm talking about aerospace, talking about a lot of, when I say remote sensing, there's a lot of wildfire and drought mitigation that is being researched. The mitigation, though, that I'm referencing gets into new technologies, new techniques, perhaps new policies that can be developed here in Colorado, born of the research that's coming out of these labs. And it's that scope of research that's helping to inform the, let's say, scope or depth or detail of a challenge, and then the scientists and their external partners from the private sector brainstorming on how this challenge can be addressed, And that is where the seed of new companies come in, as well as information to help provide resources for the companies that already exist and are really trying to solve problems of all different kinds. Then real briefly, what Colabs has been doing over the last year, as we've also been dealing with the impacts of the federal government's changes in funding, changes in staffing, and changes in priorities, is honing in on how we can best provide access to assets. What we've heard over the last year is that not only is the research and the equipment, the facilities themselves, the data sets, and of course the staff at these labs, crucial resources for companies of all kinds, but the ability to be able to reach those people and ensure that access to their information remains feasible, remains convenient. This is the role that we play. And so following this call, I hope if you have any kind of question about how to access a given federal lab for the sort of technology or economic development goals that you have, that is the role that we can play. We know the people in the labs, we know the projects that they're working on, and then particularly over the last year, I've just been in the thick, as I know all of you have in your own ways, with the changes from the current administration on the priorities, and again, then the funding and the staffing impacts across these labs. We're aware acutely of what is available and also what kind of either limits or challenges have come about, but we can be your resource that way to understand just what is still available and what challenges are also shaping the availability of different assets and data, et cetera, within these labs. I'll finish on that. There's so many different directions we could go to describe what's available and how they could be resources for you, but I'll leave you with this reference here. We're fortunate to have these labs in Colorado, but they really are national assets. And in that perspective, we'd learned starting with COVID, because we had to access so many resources and people remotely. And now over the last year, when there's been such confusion and uncertainty over what resources are available, not only in the labs here in Colorado, but throughout the country's research ecosystem, the national assets that we have here in Colorado are a hub and a magnet for other states' resources and other brilliant economic development folks who have reached me because they've heard, hey, you have this kind of information and resource in labs in Colorado. Can you tell us more? Who can we reach here? Here's the kind of project we're working on. I want you all to leverage this fantastic ecosystem we have of labs in Colorado. And I look forward to providing the context and contacts into these labs that can help you with your priorities. Thank you for letting me give you that overview. And I look forward to going down the paths of whichever kind of economic development questions you might have. I'll stop sharing here.
Okay, thanks, Dan. My quick question, you referenced CRADAs and SBIRs. First, why don't we break out what the acronym means, and then how do we begin to look for that information? How do we start to connect the dots between our businesses, our current businesses, and what's happening in the labs?
Well, so each lab would have its own, and should I presume that everyone's somewhat familiar with CRADAs and SBIRs? I don't mean to.
Nope, don't assume. Always.
Okay. Great. Okay. Well, the cooperative research and development agreements, the CRADAs, are a way for any, let's say, any federally funded research entity to enter into an agreement with a private sector partner. And it very much is on the front end a way to clarify what is the what would be the scope of or limitations on intellectual property that would be developed as the external partner and the lab are working together. and it clarifies also upfront, here's what would be available to you, external partner, and here's where there might be a limit on that. I know there's a couple of people on the call who have been involved in CRADAs and could probably describe those in a bit more detail, but I would say that anyone interested in working with one of the labs know that a CRADA is a most likely manner of engagement if you're not just simply looking to, in essence, visit them and find what they have publicly available within their data sets or within the equipment that might be there for you to arrange use of. This is for an ongoing project, a CRADA, that really has an intellectual property component. The external partner is presuming that by partnering with the lab and leveraging their assets, they're going to get to a point where they then have some new product, or like literally intellectual property that they will want to have protected. The SBIRs are particularly focused on small businesses who have a business concept that is just needing some additional research or other kind of asset from the federal labs. An adjunct, or it's a related kind of grant program, is the Small Business Technology Transfer program, the STTRs. Those are connected very much with the research universities. And there are different ways that the protocols of how you use either SBIRs or STTRs in engaging with the research universities will put limits on, or otherwise frame on the front end, what you'll be able to access, and if there's any kind of capacity. My understanding is there's not really an intellectual property component, at least intellectual property protection component, to SBIRs and STTRs. I honestly would defer to a couple of the people who are on the call today who might know more of the detail of that. I would say everyone should know, all right, and I told you I wasn't going to go down any of the dark paths, but from the last 12 months, there are some new either questions or eligibility requirements. At least there's some questions or eligibility requirements and some new protocols specific to different federal agencies that have come about that are making it a bit more either restrictive or at a minimum sort of bureaucratic as to how to engage with the labs using these different kinds of agreement frameworks. And actually, you all may know, some of you may know, that the SBIR program right now is technically in limbo. After 40 years, it was not renewed in the recent government funding agreement that came about last month. And it is still being worked on. And there's a whole set of sort of details on why that came about. But that has been a particular challenge to hundreds of, that I'm aware of, at least in Colorado, of SBIR funded companies where things are frozen right now. The outlay of funds that they would have otherwise been getting on a certain cadence is in limbo. So that's a bit of an asterisk right now on the SBIR program as a funding mechanism for companies.
I think you just answered Gary's question where he was asking if they had been reauthorized.
They're not. It's I guess the conventional wisdom, what I hear from others, people, particularly like SBIR consultants who work with economic development organizations and numerous companies, it's really close, and there's political reasons, is maybe the broad way to describe why it hasn't happened, but it will be renewed. And gosh, I'm hesitant because so much of what's happened over the last year adds such uncertainty to things. What is pragmatic and seemingly obvious as a benefit to the country would mean that the SBIR program will be renewed. But right now it is still in some debate and compromise conversations in Congress.
Does anybody have any questions for Dan? I have a few to get us started. I wanted to open up the floor.
I'll, yes, I will add, if there isn't a question, another perspective, another context for people who are trying to work with labs that would help them understand where internally the lab leadership is. Let's, I'll use the phrase taking orders from. If you choose to review the dozens of executive orders that have been issued by the president since last January, that is one of the best ways to understand what would be driving the priorities and the kinds of projects that labs are looking to work on. And I say that notwithstanding what has been their historical mission, what has been the appropriations and funding priorities that have been described by Congress. Those are still there. However, the reality over this last year has been, if you really want to understand what internal forces are driving the priorities of labs, and hence think this then ripples out into what is driving where their interest is in working with external partners, where they are prioritizing the kind of funding resources and eligibility requirements to work with them, and then where their own staff and their scientists are looking to grow their projects or leverage their existing research, will very much be taking direction from what is stated in executive orders. That's just a broader context I suggest people be aware of to understand what's driving a lot of the activities in the labs. I'll give an example too that may be relevant for some in the audience. The National Laboratory of the Rockies, formerly NREL, is very much leaning towards development of an application of critical minerals and how that can affect the full scope of research that they've always been involved in. So that is a shift that is happening, or let's say at least a re-emphasis of part of where they always were looking to gear their research. And that might be something that opens up opportunities. So I know I'm describing this in a way that is very, I know there's uncertainty in my voice. I'm really trying to be respectful and careful how I describe this. But within those executive orders, I would say are more than silver linings of opportunity. They are very much where congressional funding, and to the extent congressional alignment with the administration, those executive orders are going to give you insight into this is where the money and research priorities across all different federal agency research labs is going. So I just suggest being aware of these different executive orders.
Thanks, Dan. Patrick, it looks like we have a question from you.
Yeah, over the mid to longer term on this, we're talking about funding and federal priorities for these laboratories, these research facilities, but the elephant in the room is austerity. The federal debt is upwards of, over $30 trillion, and that is now coming to a head. And so what we're looking at now across the board is a devolution of these functions to the state and local governments and other entities in the community because the federal government is devolving them often as unfunding mandates. And so our strategy as a group needs to be to look at the various functions that we have, including these immensely valuable research facilities. And the question that I'm asking in shorthand is, are you thinking about and are we positioning ourselves to try to access other funding besides federal funding that can maybe help continue these functions? I don't know if that made sense or not, but that's the best I can phrase the question.
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. Let me encapsulate that if I can. You can tell me if I'm right. Is really what is the future funding, say, mechanism and
Strategy.
framework for for these labs? So, uh, I've been in some conversations about this and a couple other symposiums. There is a new normal that is still in process. Um, not to be trite, the only way out is through, and we're still going in. So that is where there's new opportunities because of the challenges we're facing. There's new stakeholders coming together to say, hey, this matters to me and it matters to you. We've never talked to each other before. How are we going to do this? So, uh, the reality is that there's no substitute or alternative to match the level of federal funding that we've been receiving. And that's part of the reality of the only way out is through. I think the conversations in what often are industry specific realms, particularly in climate science, but it can be in quantum, can be in robotics, can be in bioscience, is well, let's turn to the philanthropy, private philanthropy realm, or even private sector. And if you add up all of the funding that has annually / historically been provided by those two realms, there isn't enough to match what we may lose and already have lost from the federal government. So, soberly looking at the administration budget cuts, for example, that had been proposed that weren't put through, but that are double-digit percentage, like high double, 40, 50, 60% cuts. Where do you replace that? I perceive that each state is going to need to look at how it can become versions of its own source of that kind of research. That then very quickly puts our research universities and even then the next level of state colleges on the front burner of where if we're looking 5, 10 plus years out, any given state has to be, say, pragmatic and somewhat myopic on, all right, how are we going to protect the research brilliance that we have in the state? With CoLabs, we have a nascent talent retention program that we had started because the scientists and all of the staff that have been displaced out of the federal labs, we, in working with OEDIT and Boulder Chamber in particular, realized we need to try to help to matchmake at a minimum between private sector or other sources of work and these labs as scientists and facility operators and all support staff are losing their jobs over the last year. I think that is where it is going to be both pragmatic and necessary. And another way to frame it is this is the opportunity for our state. And I'm very interested in and becoming aware and engaged in the Co-Align initiative. That is where we as state-focused economic development leaders need to understand that we must become the greater source of our own brilliance. And in the short term, nurture and help protect politically as much as we can these labs, but look to create relationships with them such that if they are defunded or destaffed at significant levels, that those people and their research and their projects stay here in Colorado.
So taking the work that they were doing in the labs and being able to maybe help them create a small business or maybe educate within our community college or university systems or being able to utilize them as a true intellectual asset that then can then grow or incubate or become something greater for the state of Colorado. I mean, that's what I'm hearing from you, Dan.
Yeah, and I think in a good way, and again, continue to absorb the co-align initiatives details. I think this is a really crucial effort that you're involved in. I perceive the Venn diagram with collabs, particularly is in the workforce development realm. First is really the access to labs. Like, let's make sure as many economic development experts are aware of just what assets there are in the labs, but to a tangible end, particularly in workforce development. All right, what can the labs bring into any given region or chamber or industry associations' interests, and make sure those assets from these labs are resources for their own economic development goals.
I ask a very similar question, really about how can we tether some of this out into how can our community colleges take advantage of what's happening in the labs right now? How can we start to think about the educational resources that we could provide or have that take the learnings out of the lab and put it into practical, you know, application?
Mhm. I think I know that it's not as well known as it could be, should be amongst really all K-12, but we'll go to the colleges as well. How much information is readily available by structures that came out of COVID when we weren't able to access the labs in person? There's really an amazing amount of information, databases and online, like say on-demand webinars, but also like literal lab access for remote access to research projects that the colleges across the state, I'm certain, could leverage more across agriculture, across robotics, across aerospace, across energy technologies, a whole slew of climate and atmospheric research and ecological research. That is an untapped connection that I see very much being in the vision of where the co-align effort is going. And I think the regional meetings that you'd mentioned are where collabs could be part of, but very much, I think, makes even more sense for us to make the connection between given labs. And as much as it might be relevant to the issues of a given region that you're visiting, but otherwise just having someone who's available from a given lab to say, here is how you can access what we have. It doesn't even take quote permission. Like, it is available online. It is meant to be accessed by the public. And we just want to make sure that is a first step with this awareness. I perceive people throughout the state, then that gets the wheels turning in their mind of, oh, here's what's available. And frankly, collectively, we can all go to OEdit and ideally get even more awareness and support from them. There's another reality that I'm looking ahead to that we all can be looking to. And this isn't, say, partisan or aimed towards any particular person. It just is a new sheriff is going to be in town in a year from now after the gubernatorial election. And that new leadership will be wanting to, I guess I shouldn't presume. I'm going to encourage them to very much adopt the co-align vision and otherwise look to say, yeah, you obviously you're new in charge here in the state, and here's what we have as assets. Here's also the political reality that we're in. We know, or you've all probably seen some of the ways in which Colorado has definitely got a target on it for all sorts of surreal and inane political retribution. That probably isn't going to go away. And the new governor is going to need to figure out, all right, how do we shore up what we have here and otherwise continue to move forward? And these assets within the federal labs are just that. And I look forward to helping make these connections with you all. But Yeah, I'm sorry. I hear myself getting into like almost a cynical or skeptical kind of place. It's the opposite. It really, the silver linings of what is growing and where certain industries have opportunities, connecting with the resources that are here in the labs. It is exciting when you get into the labs and are talking with people. You take the, say, politics out of it and other stressors, and what we have here in the state to leverage is amazing. So let Collabs help you.
Cliff, I see your hand up.
Hello,
Thanks,
Cliff.
Kim, and thank you, Dan, for a terrific presentation and being brave enough to come into this forum to talk about a very fluid and dangerous environment right now. I wondered if you could address just a couple or elaborate on a couple of basic things that are fundamental to the way most of us think about economic development in our communities and our regions. And I'm thinking specifically about the talent attraction um, strength that the labs bring to Colorado. Worldwide scientists, coming here. I'm thinking about the innovation, the basic research and development that they're doing, and the innovation that comes of that, and how some of that gets spun out through partnerships with universities and so forth. And then I'm thinking about also the multiplier effect. CU used to do impact analyses of what the federal labs contributed to the state, and the multiplier effect was pretty significant. I mean, very significant. So I'm wondering if you could sort of elaborate on any of those points from a economic developer's perspective.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I jotted those down. I'll try to do this quick. In the new reality that we're still evolving into, we, the first two points that you mentioned, I want to describe again, like a reality check of here, at least in the federal labs, is what is almost going in the wrong direction. When it comes to talent retention, but let's take that challenge in the labs that I'll describe as an opportunity for the state. If not, actually, I feel a responsibility. This is not just, oh, okay, here's where we should be going with economic development strategies. We have to. I feel like both deeply pragmatic as well as even moral, philosophical reasons. The talent retention, yes, the labs have been, and our country has been with our research ecosystem, a magnet for the most brilliant people from around the world for decades. We are going into our second year now of basically putting up bureaucratic and other kinds of say limits on welcoming those people from around the world. And that is a long-term impact that I am afraid is going to be really hard to recover from. We've learned just in the last couple of weeks, for example, new protocols coming into the National Institutes for Standards and Technology. So that's under the Department of Commerce umbrella, is that foreign nationals are not going to be allowed on their campus as of March 31st. Hearing from companies already that have said without that access to NIST technologies, we're going to have to move out of Colorado and find another location. There's one particular company that may be moving to Boston there because they won't be able to access the NIST campus. I'm concerned in hearing that from other federal agencies that, yes, so we also have, these aren't very publicly like announced. These are just internal admin protocols of, yeah, here's this limit on particularly foreign nationals coming to our campus. They can't come on the weekends anymore, for example, or they can't come after hours. Things like any of that limitation there is deeply a challenge. However, that's on federal property. That is in the federal labs. The state, I think, and economic development organizations should be taking that opportunity to say, hey, maybe you can't go there, but you can come here. Here are the assets that we have. And I think the university system and our college systems will have to be the nexus of, maybe you can't go into NIST directly, but you can be going to GILA at CU Boulder. You can be going to the campus at Colorado State University or at Anschutz, and then of course all the other colleges. So on talent attraction, let's take that as there's an urgent need for us to have a strategy to be an alternative to the federal labs sites for some of the most brilliant people who otherwise would be coming to Colorado. On innovation, there's also a switch now within the federal agencies away from fundamental research because the focus is so much on tech transfer and applied science. The mindset within the administration is we want science that turns into companies, jobs, products, et cetera. And that's definitely valuable and should be there, but it is definitely shifting away resources, internal focus, and internal priorities, and internal to agencies. I mean, internal conversations around we are not going here. We're not going to focus so much on the fundamental research. We want stuff that turns into research that turns into companies. So fundamental, foundational research that would land back on the universities, and perhaps that's I was going to say where it should be, but it's not. We should be, as a country, investing in our agencies in fundamental research. In any case, it's another realm of opportunity. Lastly, on the multiplier effect, coming out of COVID, we at CoLabs weren't sure what the impacts had been in terms of staffing and other priorities and overall budget numbers. We're looking to do a new round of studies, and I think it's going to be crucial for the multiplier effect to be one of the priority stats details that we are looking to get out of economic analyses of federal and, let's say now, state investment into scientific research. And I'll leave it at that. I think that would be the message that ends up resonating and has the metrics behind it to demonstrate why federal research into the labs is crucial. Or, excuse me, federal state support into research labs would be crucial. And I didn't start sharing no, okay, that's Kim's calendar. I know we're getting up to time here. And Cliff and several others that I know would share his questions. Thank you. We should have further next conversations on this. That is a deeper conversation for us to get into. And I look forward to helping with those conversations if I can.
Well, everybody, thank you so much. I would please give Dan a big round of applause. He's been through a lot in the last year. He is a huge asset, to the state of Colorado. We are here to support you and the work that you are doing, and recognize how important it is to the state's economy. So thank you so much for presenting today. More will be coming with Dan, but I do want to remind everybody that we do have a state economic development strategy now that we can start to incorporate some of this work into that strategy. So let's start thinking regionally and from the state sets and how we can incorporate all of that. I have the calendar in front of you for our 2026 events calendar. More will be coming out from Dan with resources and how we can start to access the assets and get them delivered into our community. Bobby, I believe, is dropping in a quick survey for you all. It's a 3-minute survey, real quick. So please take that. Let us know that we're still staying on track and bringing valuable information forward to you all. So watch out for us in your communities coming in April. More to come. Thank you so much. Have a great, wonderful day.
Hey, thank you, everybody. I'll add the word for all that we're doing is purposeful. They're really, we're solving problems and solving puzzles. Right. And positive aspirational theme to all this, notwithstanding the heaviness.
That's great. Thanks, Dan.
All right. Thank you, everybody.